The biggest thing that happened was when we started the tour, really. That was when it all really hit home. There was never any talk about what's happening next. It was always, thanks guys, you did great, see you again sometime. So you never knew what you were going to be doing again. But then I got this phone call, Paul would like to do a new studio album and he really enjoyed working with you. Would you like to be involved in the studio album? Oh, yes, please. So I went down there and he'd written these songs with Elvis Costello, trying to recreate the Lennon and McCartney vibe and be a bit more raw-edged. So I found myself in this incredible company doing this album, and it was all about doing new songs and original stuff. So there was no Beatles thing apart from the fact that Jeff Emerick was there. So there was no thought of a tour, there was no thought of doing Beatles stuff. But towards the end of doing the album, he had this manager called Richard Ogden who'd sort of planned the whole thing in his mind, how it was all going to go. He was going to persuade Paul to get a new band, young band together. He was going to persuade Paul to do a new studio album with people like Elvis Costello and rekindle that edgy spirit. And then he was going to persuade Paul to do a big world tour because he hadn't toured for like a decade before that. And he never played the Beatles stuff either. He'd always done like strictly Wings, new material or whatever. And so towards the end of the album, Paul, I might tour. Richard wants me to do a tour. We're thinking about doing this tour, and we might do some of the Beatles stuff. And he gave us all like cassettes to listen to the song, even though we'd all knew them like off by heart. Eventually, it sort of morphed from recording songs for the album to actually just jamming Beatles songs and things like that. He just wanted to play a load of stuff and see what worked and what didn't. We ended up at that point with Wicks, the keyboard player, who was a big session keyboard player at the time, and Robbie McIntosh, who was in the Pretenders. And they'd come in towards the end of the album because they were like phenomenal musicians and helped us finish the album. And then they obviously morphed into the live band. And the funny thing was that Robbie just knew all the Beatles stuff off by heart. And he was like, said to Paul, no, the chord's like that. That's what the chord is. And Paul didn't know what the chords were for half these things. Some of the songs we did had never ever been performed live. So then we were still in the studio, but instead of recording stuff, we were just rehearsing stuff all the time. Paul wouldn't let them book a whole tour. He said, I'll do a couple of months and see how I like it, and then we might do another couple. And so we just booked a couple of months around Europe, playing quite small, sort of sports arena type things. Even though we were doing rehearsals and I was playing these songs in rehearsals, I was more kind of focusing on what am I going to play and what did Ringo play. I think the first time it really hit me was we were playing in Gothenburg, I think it was, in Sweden, in this ice rink. We flew in the private jet thing and all the gear was set up, and I looked around the hall. It was probably the biggest place I'd played that point anyway, and I looked around the hall and thought, oh crikey, here we are. And we did this sound check, and I remember being incredibly nervous at the sound check. I was like shaking as I was playing. We weren't doing Beatles stuff, we were just jamming at the sound, but I remember being incredibly nervous at the sound check, thinking, oh God, tonight's the night, I hope I don't screw up. All throughout the whole tour, really, there were certain points of the night I was almost weeping because the whole thing was very emotional, because they had like footage going behind us of the Beatles and Martin Luther King and Vietnam and everything, and you were playing these songs and you could see these 40 and 50-year-old people at the front. There was a huge stadium, but the lights off the stage would just illuminate the front two rows, and there was like 40-year-old, 50-year-old people just in absolute raptures. Just every night you just thought, oh, this is just amazing to be doing this. And I didn't really think it's amazing to be playing Ringo's drum part or it's amazing to be in Paul's band. You just thought, I'm so privileged to be playing these songs and for these people to be enjoying it so much. So that was all the European bit, and then they said, okay, we're going to do America. And then the whole thing just went up to like 10 levels, because Paul hadn't played America for a very long time. And he had lots of friends in America. He spends part of the year living in America, so it was a massive deal. You had like Michael Jackson, Stevie Wonder, Paul Simon, all coming to the shows. It got quite hard work, but the audience was just so phenomenal. You can time the show. The show sort of went an extra 15 minutes because there was so much more applause between the songs than when we played in Europe. And some of the applause was just deafening. Like we were doing Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, which I don't think had ever been played live by anybody before then. When we finished that song, which ended up being about sort of 8 minutes long or something, because there was Paul had done this long guitar solo thing. When we finished that song, it was just like, and your ears were just distorting. And on the European leg, it was like, 1, 2, 3, 4 into the next song. But on this one, I had enough time to have a drink, towel off, reaching the drums, because the applause just went on for like 10 minutes after that one song. And it was just like that through the whole show. It was just a mega tour. Yeah, well, that LA show, you never knew what was going to happen, and halfway through the show, somebody said, "Oh, Stevie Wonder's coming up. We were doing Ebony and Ivory, and Stevie Wonder's coming up to sing it." So we did that. That was funny. Here I am, not only playing with Paul, but now I'm playing with Stevie Wonder. God. And then backstage, Michael Jackson was playing with the Game Boy or whatever backstage, true to his image kind of thing. We were in the dressing room before the show, and somebody said, "Oh, I just happened to see Jack Nicholson backstage." I said, "What?" And we charged out of the dressing room, "Where's Jack? Where's Jack?" And we went and spoke with Jack Nicholson for 5 minutes. That was just amazing. And then just on the drummer side, like as I said, when I was at college, we were just huge on fusion and everything. I remember when we played in San Francisco with Paul, I looked off to the side. I happened to look off to the side of the stage, and there was Narada and Michael Walden, who was like my number one favourite drummer. And the rest of the show, I just played like a complete idiot, and it was just a disaster. We played in LA one night, and then the next night we were playing in LA again. And when I got to the sound check, my drum tech said, "Oh, I've invited a couple of people to the show tonight." And I said, "Oh, right, great. Who cares?" kind of thing. He said, "Oh, yeah, Greg Bisonet." And I thought, "Oh, no." Because I obviously read Modern Drummer magazine and everything. I knew what a massive drummer Greg was. And I thought, the last thing I need is all these top drummers coming down. And he said, "Oh, I've invited him to the sound check." Oh, no. So anyway, we were doing the sound check, and then in walks Greg with his friend Brett, the keyboard player from David Lee Roth. And I was obviously like a nervous wreck. And I thought, "Okay, come up on stage and have a look at the drums and everything." Anyway, Paul's hovering around. So I said, "Oh, Greg, you better meet Paul." And Paul was, "Oh, you're an LA musician." And Greg had his photo taken. Greg and Brett had their photo taken with Paul, which he still carries around with him in his wallet. Anyway, funnily enough, I know he's a massive Beatles fan, and I always thought it would have been great if he could have followed me and been Paul's drummer after me, because he's such an amazing drummer and he's a massive Beatles fan as well. As luck would have it, he got a call, and he's now playing in Ringo's all-star band. He's like the house drummer in Ringo's band, and he gets to play drums with Ringo every night, and Ringo's like one of his heroes, so it's a fantastic gig. And I found out they were coming to Australia, so I emailed Greg and said, "Oh, I see you're coming to Australia, I'd love to hook up with you." And so he said, "Oh yeah, come down to the show." And I said, "Oh well, you're playing in Adelaide, and we're planning to be in Adelaide on holiday that week, so I'll come down and see you." During the afternoon, we met Greg and had a bite to eat in the afternoon, had a chat. And he said, "Oh yeah, we'll come to the show and get you backstage." And I hate all the backstage thing. But he said, "I'll come backstage and maybe you'll meet Ringo. Ringo's very private, but maybe he'll want to say hello to you because you played with Paul." So we went backstage, and sure enough, Ringo pokes his head round the door and shakes my hand. So it's just amazing, because I got to meet the two guys from the Beatles. And then as they're getting ready to go on, I said, "All right, well, Greg, have a good show." And he said, "Oh, you're going to come up, aren't you?" So I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Oh, well, you've got to come up and play the last song with us." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, we've got 2 drum kits and Ringo's singing, so you might as well come up and play with me." And I said, "No, I can't do that. I don't play enough anymore, and I don't know what the songs are." And he said, "Oh, it's with a little help from my friends, you know it. It's easy. I tell you, it goes like this, and then at the end, I'll give you a nod, and it goes like that." And it's going to be an absolute disaster. So he said, "Just at the end of this song, make sure that you're by the side of the stage, and the drum tech will bring you on." So I thought I was just going to see this show, Innocent Person, and next thing I'm in the flipping show. And so okay, at the end of this particular song, towards the end of the show, I went backstage and the drum tech rolled me on. Suddenly I'm behind Ringo's own kit with Greg to the left playing, and we did with a little help from my friends. There was Steve Lukather on guitar and Todd Rundgren, another hero of mine, on guitar. It was an amazing band. And managed to get through that, and then they do the last song of the show, which is "Give Peace a Chance." And it's just managed to. That's the last thing that you can tick on your bucket list. Really, you've done most of the Beatles songs with Paul McCartney, and then you've done the Beatles songs you hadn't done before with Ringo. I think I've just about ticked it off now. So yeah, that was amazing. That was this year, so I can probably die happy now.